Howdy, y'all. Welcome to the Plot Holes Podcast, uh, where a couple of assholes, a couple of jackasses stretch credulity and mock artistic vision to tell you what's wrong
Assholes
with
works.
multi-million dollars movies. Yeah, assholes works, I guess. We could say that now. I don't know. I have to rewrite this thing because this little intro bit is it was very what do you call it obtuse to begin with. Uh, so
Oh, good.
I am Macron,
And I'm Dirty Invincible.
and we're the
And
plot
where's the plot hole?
holes. One of these days, we may get the
Yep.
timing right for that. Maybe. No bets.
No bets.
All right, Dirty. What's on our plate for today? What are we doing today?
Yeah, we'll be poking at the holes of Short Circuit, released again in 1986, just like our last movie, Fly of the
I have to ask
Navigator.
though. Did you have to say poking at the holes?
Yeah, poking at the holes.
Okay.
Yeah. The movie opens with a montage of robots being built. We get a close up of components and a manufacturing plate for Saint prototype number 5, built by the bad guys, Nova Robotics. Nova Laboratories Robots Division, located in Damon, Washington. More on that later. We then cut to a military demonstration of the robots as they are assaulted by tanks and trucks, definitely driven by test dummies and not real dudes. The robots make quick work of the vehicles with their laser trope attacks. Pew, 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 pew. And a tank does get a hit, though. More on all that later.
Multiple times.
Yeah, we are then introduced to Dr. Marner, head of Nova, and he goes on and on about sophisticated, adaptable, and how badass the robots are. And meanwhile, they perform choreographed moves and shake up a martini. More on that as well. We also get the full name of the robots. SAINT stands for Strategic Artificially Intelligent Nuclear Transport. And he explains later on, our general explains how they're meant to be dropped behind enemy lines and then move a nuclear payload up and have the last laugh, basically.
Robot bombs. Their last strike robot bombs.
Yep. So a storm's brewing, though, and it forces the party indoors. The Nova crew packs up the robots and they head back to the lab, where we meet Newton Crosby, played by Steve Gutenberg, who's the creator of the Saint robots. While they're a technician,
A technician.
maybe possibly incompetently keeps number 5 plugged into a generator that for some reason is hooked up to the main power lines. And you guessed it, more on that later. Said lines get struck by lightning, and we get a Frankenstein homage as number 5 gets hit with the surge and gets more than a few screws locked loose in a very quickening style lightning show reminiscent of Highlander. Technicians visibly inspect and declare, hey, it's good to go. And despite looking banged up, and as they order the robots inside, N5, number 5, is, sorry, my notes, I just shortened it to N5, is clearly moving, wonky, and bumping into walls. As the party goes on, number 5 starts showing emergent signs of sentience, playing with switches, getting distracted in a cat-like manner that leads to his unwitting escape from the lab as he gets on a truck. And then
I love how his escape was literally being pushed out of the lab.
yeah,
Man, that was a brilliant escape.
yeah, and then the robots are ordered into the party, but number 5 is missing. So Fisher Stevens and Brownface then lets Dr. Marner know what happened, and everyone scrambles to find number 5 as he continues to bumble his way outside the labs and onto a farm. And Nova teams try to communicate with number 5, and we get a cute Dr. Pepper ad as we continue to see number 5's intelligence evolve. Eventually, Nova Security find number 5, but incompetently cause an accident because it's like right in front of their noses, and that allows number 5 to again unwittingly escape via parachute. Like he's not even trying. At this point, Robot 2, Nova 0. Number 5
For
lands
people
on
that created robots, they're really bad at keeping them.
yeah. Number 5 lands. They got a GPS tracker and everything. And it's not really GPS, so it's got actually really bad short range.
Completely different.
Lands on a food truck belonging to Stephanie, played by Ali Sheedy, with a bad 80s hairdo. She unwittingly brings him home as he stows away on top of her truck. She has a brief confrontation with her scumbag ex, who is trying to steal her dog for medical research money purposes. Then we cut to nighttime, and number 5 is making a ruckus. I don't know if you can describe the ruckus. Stephanie clearly cannot describe the ruckus because she thinks the robot is an alien and proceeds to try to teach him stuff about Earth and brings him inside. And he starts to run amok. His curiosity gets out of hand. Like any frustrated parent would do, she plops the problem child in front of a TV and Three Stooges, which is important later on. At the end of the scene, he lets out an input, as if greatly satisfied on the quality of input that is Three Stooges, and I think my stepdad would probably agree with that statement. Stephanie wakes up to number 5, still binging TV with a very short attention span until he comes across a crime drama. Stephanie fights with him over the TV, and number 5 frustratingly turns it on. They fight back and forth like that until he pulls out his little transmitter and turns it on. Creator, take notes on how that works. We realize just how much junk TV has filled his brain with, and honestly, looking back at my early childhood, I can relate. And after that, she forces number 5 outside to go touch some grass, where he misidentifies stuff like a child and is seeing cloud shapes like people do. He then falls down to an animal pen, and at this point, she just now sees the plate of manufacture. So this prompts Stephanie to call the lab, demand to speak to Dr. Warmonger, as she calls him, or Dr. Marner. Marner tries to get her to keep number 5 there until they can pick him up so that they can disassemble him and research him, for debugging purposes, like you do. And so, Stephanie tells number 5, and he seems to understand all this, and then he doesn't quite have a fear of what they're going to do to him yet until he starts following a grasshopper, steps on it, doesn't understand the repercussions until Steph explains to him how death works. He finally makes the association between disassembly and death and starts panicking with the often spoken "no disassemble, no disassemble." So he freaks out, steals Stephanie's truck. This time he's purposely fleeing, but he is an absolute terror on the road. At this point, he does things where he rips the driver's seat out of the window so he can actually take control and drive vehicles. So while this is happening, Ben, who is Fisher Stevens, and Crosby use their van to track down number 5. Stephanie manages to calm him down and gets him to stop the truck. Crosby and Ben then confront them, and she's starting to argue with them about, hey, he's sentient, he's fearing death. And here we get the really quotable, like, number 5 is alive from number 5 in his own defense against, being disassembled. One thing I noticed about this moment, it's timed at the halfway mark in the movie. It's kind of a similar reveal, big moment that we kind of had in Fly of the Navigator as well. I don't know if it was something in this year in movies where they had a big reveal like at the halfway mark, but I mean, it definitely.
No, I think that's a pretty solid movie trope with it's the 3-act play, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Eventually Nova shows up. They start shooting up the place. Crosby manages to run into oncoming fire for like you do. Tries to shut down number 5 himself. He succeeds, and number 5 is back in the hands of Nova for disassembly, and that's the end of the movie. So it's not. His head is still running, and he wakes up in the Nova van and cleverly reactivates the rest of his body. More on that later. He holds up Ben and the driver to commandeer the van, and then it starts the running gag of him ripping out the driver's seat so he can drive the vehicles away again. At this point, Robot 3, Nova 0. He finds his tracker during all this, like he notices on the screen, like, oh, I'm being tracked, and then finds it on his body. Does the obvious trick of tossing it onto a passing vehicle, the back of a passing truck, in fact. At this point, he's become a better driver after being shut down, and we get a foreshadowing of the track, Who's Johnny, which we had earlier in the film as well. And more.
I'd like to point out that on top of him being a better driver, he also suddenly knows traffic laws because he signals his turn. He uses a hand signal for his turn.
Well, it just, like all self-driving machines, it just needs a reboot, like my Tesla, starts
Every
acting
once in a
wonky.
while,
Just give it a reboot. It
it'll
drives
kill
fine.
you if you don't just reboot it every once in a while, right?
It's true. Yeah, it's true. And it also it oddly enough it also throws the driver's seat out when I try and get in.
That's
Really weird.
robots still doing that today. I mean, it was a good prediction back in the 80s, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, we get a foreshadowing of the track "Who's Johnny," which we also heard earlier in the film, and there's more on that later. Anyway, so yeah, number 5 makes his way back to Stephanie while she's bathing, but not after the news attracts her ex to her place as well. Number 5 interrupts her bath time, compliments on her software, and then we cut to the morning where breakfast time shenanigans ensues, and he can't get the lumps out of the pancakes. They're interrupted by the ex trying to get a reward for number 5, but he makes quick work of the ex disassembling his car and then one-upping him in a fight with his laser reflexes and actual lasers. After the fight, the two run off again, Nova hunting them down, and both the security goons and Crosby Ben
Who have made like
um,
two separate groups at this point in time, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
yeah, Crosby and Ben are kind of like rogue scientists, right?
Yeah, they've been commanded to stand down and stay at their terminal else they're going to get fired, but obviously they don't listen, and they even have a confrontation with Dr. Warmonger about him holding him at gunpoint, then him bluffing, and then just driving off. Anyway, so
More on that
both
later, by the way.
yeah, both crews are trying to hunt them down, and eventually number 5 realizes he wants to talk to the head bozo Crosby to try and get the other bozos Nova to back off and ask him questions. So they all arrange to sit down between Crosby and Steph. Crosby tries to get all lovey-dovey with her at this bar that her ex took her to, and they're interrupted by Nova security ambushing their date or a meeting. I mean, while that happens, number 5 makes quick work of the units that were sent after him and reprograms them, and it demonstrates some pretty interesting skills that we'll talk to later. So yeah, number 5 then rescue Stephanie. They make yet another escape. Robot 4, Nova 0. Well, Crosby confronts Schroeder about not Schroeder, not the guy from Breaking Bad. Schroeder about the ambush, and reprogrammed robots interrupt their discussion, all dressed up as the Three Stooges and acting out a Stooges bit. It's yeah, number 5 and quality sense of humor. So the number 5 and Stephanie are talking. He goes back, kidnaps Crosby, and then takes him back to where he and Steph are hiding in the mountains. There, Crosby and number 5 have a long series of talks overnight, debating the nature of his sentience. And eventually, Crosby is convinced by number 5's crazed laughter responses to a bad joke.
Bad, mildly anti-Semitic joke.
Yeah, at a point where he is sleep deprived. Yeah, that's what it takes to convince him of sentience, is being sleep deprived and telling bad jokes. Anyway, so the happy times are interrupted by Nova security and the military. Number 5 and crew try to flee but are blocked. Steph and Crosby try to convince Nova that he's alive, but it's futile, and the military continues to fight number 5. And then a helicopter blows it up with a missile. So, security and military rejoice. End of the movie.
Again, end of the movie.
Yeah, Crosby and Steph are devastated that their friend is dead, as the guards carry pieces of number 5 away and brag about how they're going to put it on their furniture as a display piece. And then as Crosby and Steph drive away and talk about his plans now that he's fired, he mentions that his dad's got land in Montana. Cue number 5 popping out of hiding in the van saying, "Yeah, it's a great idea." More TV quotes ensue, and then he explains. He then explains the decoy he made from spare parts. Hey, Robot 5, Nova 0. And on that note of running gags, we cut to number 5 ripping out the driver's seat yet again so he can drive, maybe like a pro or a maniac. Who knows? And as they drive off, number 5 says he wants to be Kevin or Dave. But then he settles on Johnny 5 because it's cool and because it was in the song written for the movie.
I believe that's the quote too, right? It's like, "Hey, how about Johnny? Because that's the song written for the movie."
Yeah. Very fourth wall breaking moment.
Yeah, right. So wait, so why why did we pick this movie? I feel like I feel like there's some obvious answers there, but why? Why Dirty? Why did we pick this?
I know that it was like when we were in the middle of picking a bunch of movies, like we were picking Flight of the Navigator, and this was among the list of a bunch of 80 movies that we thought would be pretty great to cover. A lot of lighthearted stuff, and there would be plenty to pick apart too. And actually, and on that note though, despite some of the tropes and the goofs with like the tank drivers and stuff, there's actually kind of a bit of internal consistency. Uh, I was actually surprised at how much there was, but there's still plenty of fodder to pick apart. And I know that going back to like what we decided on another note, we decided to do both this one and Short Circuit 2, which we'll be doing next time as well. Surprise spoilers. And we
It's
decided to do that right
not a
after
spoiler.
Flight
It's
of the
an
Navigator.
advanced preview.
Advanced preview. So we decided to do that after Flight of the Navigator. Like, yeah, we'll do both of those. And then like Flight of the Navigator, there's a lot of bits that I've quoted throughout my life. Both this and Short Circuit 2. No disassemble, probably like the big one. Yeah.
I have to say,
What about you?
I genuinely thought that part of the reason why I think I was the one that brought this one up, but part of the reason I brought it up, or I at least thought it was a good idea initially, was because I thought there was going to be a lot more fodder in this one than there was. Surprisingly, like you said, there are some very big things in this that don't go well, but the
Yeah.
for the most part, the on the whole, the movie is relatively consistent internally. I have very fond memories of this movie from childhood. Like this was like Johnny Five was I part of my like love of science fiction comes from this movie. In all honesty, this and Flight of the Navigator, another one. But I also realized while watching this one that the most things I remember about Short Circuit actually all happened in Short Circuit too.
Which is it's really funny that you mentioned that one. But I'm glad that you brought that up because when I first saw both of these, it was actually around the same time because back then when we were kids and stuff, you saw these stuff often not when they were released, but like on movie channels and stuff when they would play them back to back. And so a lot of the time I didn't actually sit down and watch them all the way through. And so you mentioned things that you remember about Short Circuit happening in Short Circuit 2. For me, it was like the opposite. Like the
Oh
whole
yeah.
Three Stooges bit, I thought that was in Short Circuit 2. And the whole like little robot guys that are in Short Circuit 2, I thought those were in Short Circuit 1. Like it was kind of both, it went both ways. But I definitely was confused about that until I was a kid and sat down, or until later when I was a kid, I sat down and fully watched Short Circuit 2 and was disappointed that the Three Stooges, like, where's the Three Stooges
Or
bit?
the Three Stooges
Why
bit,
is it
yeah.
in there? Where's Ali Sheedy? Like, how is she not in here? I
I
didn't know
gotta
she
be
was Ali Sheedy, but
I gotta be
where's
completely honest. I totally, both Steve Gutenberg and Ali Sheedy totally forgot that they were part of this movie until I started watching this one again this
but they
week.
weren't in the second one. Fisher
They weren't in the
Stevens
second one.
was.
Fisher Stevens is in the
Yeah,
second one, which I think is a testament to the quality of Fisher Stevens as an actor. Who we've already talked about Fisher Stevens once in Hackers.
yeah,
The Plague. I mean, we'll talk about him more later here, but
for sure.
weirdly, Fisher Stevens in brown face, least problematic part of this movie.
Yeah.
One of the least.
So onto our plot hole
Yeah.
fodder. And I just another reminder that for the sake of brevity, we won't be covering everything wrong and every plot hole we find with the movies that we cover. Just each episode would end up hours longer than we want them to be. So if you
Yeah.
think we missed something, trust us, we didn't. We're just keeping things brief and picking out the items we want to discuss. But if there is something that you want to point out that we left out of this episode, feel free to go to our YouTube channel after we've uploaded the episode and leave that plot hole in the comments. Our channel is at the plot holes, all one word. And while there, take a moment to hit the subscribe and like buttons. And thanks a bunch. And now on to the plot holes. And first one I want to point out is Damon Washington, 98615. We see this on the manufacturing plate on number 5 in the beginning of the movie. That's the only time we really see this, and it's apparently the location of Nova Laboratories. But it's not a real place. It's not even a real zip code.
Oh yeah.
And while looking it up, I was looking at the zip code. And I was like, okay, there's something about Honolulu that came up. But then you look up and you're like, okay, you look up Honolulu, like it's not in Honolulu zip codes. And you look up that zip code specifically in Google Maps, and it's just nothing. So I don't know what's up with that. That said, there is a Damon Lake in Washington. So
Oh well, and I mean, what's funny is, which it makes sense. So I live kind of on the border of Oregon and Washington, but like, Ali Sheedy's character does explicitly state, "Hey, this is Oregon," and
yeah,
she is like her house is in Astoria. Like that's the bridge, that's the Astoria Bridge across the
yeah.
Columbia River and everything in the background of all those shots. Um, and so yeah, this is just another one of those '80s movies that was shot in Astoria.
Yeah,
And I
it's
feel
great.
like they
And
just made up some kind of nearby location to kind of make it seem like it was legitimate.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. They mentioned, hey, we're in Oregon now, and they mentioned multiple times that they're in Oregon now. But it's, you know, it was started like up in Washington. Like that's where the
Yeah.
story starts, and it makes sense. They're right across. Like Astoria is right over the river from
Yep.
Washington. If you're familiar with the geography in the area, so that whole thing where he escapes and he gets off the bridge and then lands in Oregon, totally plausible,
Legitimate.
not a
Yeah,
plot
yeah.
hole. Yeah, just Damon, Washington itself is not a real place.
So I think another thing that like early on from the beginning that they start to show us that kind of like triggers me a little bit is that like we see like uh the the, during the test the robots are firing these lasers, and what's really surprising to me is that these lasers actually look fairly realistic when it comes to like what would be a small, you know, hand usable laser for a human. Like this looks like what I would expect a laser to look like. It's a casing around a large. It's a large boxy casing around the laser, and the laser kind of has like an aperture. It's not like a lens focusing it. It's just an open box that the laser like comes out of different areas. Like there's a mirror inside, like aiming it.
Yeah.
But then like these lasers are like, first off, they shoot this Jeep. They shoot the Jeep in the soft top, which is apparently the most explosive part of the Jeep. I don't know if you know this or not, but if you're trying to stop a Jeep and someone's getting away in a Jeep and it's got a soft top, you just shoot that soft top because it'll go up in flames. Uh,
It
like
does
later,
show, like, to benefit them, like some of those vehicles, they do hit them in the engine compartment, which like is what you would want to do if you're disabling a vehicle with lasers. But yeah,
but the
all those
tank,
other unnecessary shots,
which is funny you mentioned that because I agree. I think despite the fact that they shot the soft top off of one of the Jeeps, they do like they do generally when they're targeting like vehicles, like they do seem to be shooting at like gas tanks and stuff and engines and stuff like that.
yeah,
Except the tank, which they just shoot at one of the random the laser hits like one of the wheels inside the tread for some reason. That's also an explosive part on tanks apparently.
it blows up the whole tank.
Blows up the whole tank. All you gotta do is hit that one wheel, and it will just the tank's up in the air.
The Achilles wheel.
Yeah, I mean, and like the explosion thing is also a thing that carries over to like silly things like when number five's running, or he's confronting the other four robots. And I don't remember which one it is. Is that number one that like is coming at him and is like chasing him down, and he
I think
kind of
so.
like
Yeah.
jukes him into an outhouse.
Yeah.
When he crashes into the outhouse explodes, and so it's like they just want. This was like one of those like quintessential '80s things where it's like, well, if we're gonna do an action scene, things have to blow up.
Well, and then the robot even like kind of jokingly is complaining about the methane levels in there too.
Yeah. Okay, so clearly it's just the fart gases
The fart gases that were
that
very
have built up
volatile.
inside of the outhouse. Those are volatile gases.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So definitely the weapons, more on like, you mentioned, um, kind of what you'd expect small human wieldable lasers to look like, but at the same time, like the destructive power that those lasers are demonstrating, that wasn't available back then at that size. And a lot of the additional capabilities of like the robots themselves, more on that later, are
Yeah,
not like plausible with the technology available at that size, you know.
agreed.
Um, and it's kind of like okay, the kind of technology that they need to be able to pull off this stuff is like back then would fill a warehouse kind of thing. And then the lasers themselves, the weapons that like we have weapons, laser weaponry in the Navy, but it takes a whole fucking naval boat's worth of uh
Of
energy
capacitors.
production to provide power to that laser for it to be effective. Like
Yeah.
even now to this day, like that's the
Well, that
problem.
and I think the other side of it too is you see the lasers do things like they so like one of the robots shoots at number 5 and number 5 kind of dodges it. The way lasers work is they have like a focal point that you're focusing all of the energy from that laser onto that point, and that's what makes them so powerful. But even inches away from that focal point, you're not going to be it's not going to have the same impact, right?
Yeah.
And so like one of the funny things, which is this is like one of those nerdy things where it doesn't really matter if you think about it, hand wavy movie magic, whatever. But the lasers, so like the robot shoots it at number 5, like, and it hits a tree like 10 feet away, and it does like it like burns a hole through it or something. It does an insane amount of damage, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if that robot was aiming for something 10 feet closer, it wouldn't have actually done any damage. The laser wouldn't have done any damage to something 10 feet
Yeah.
behind it, because of the way lasers work. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a whole lot of like, uh, a whole lot of that's not how lasers work in this one. And then also
Yeah.
B, everything explodes. That's the other.
Yep. Yeah. And speaking of, that's how things work. How does charging work? And I think I consider this the overall main plot hole of the movie's premise. I don't know if you would agree with
You
this
too.
statement or not, because like the whole like he's alive because of the Frankenstein moment there. It's just I think it's the overall plot hole of the movie's premise itself. And um, the first off, like number 5 is hooked up to a generator. A generator is usually a portable device that,
All
you
right.
guessed it, generates power. You provide it fuel, it provides power. So why would it be hooked up to the main grid? And
See,
there's an argument for that. Like maybe it's a battery, maybe it's a capacitor, but then it'd be called a battery, not a generator. And
that's
then
what I was gonna say. That exact same thing, where it's like, yeah, but it's like, could just be a charging generator is
a
what it is. So
charging generator.
it takes
Yeah,
power
but
from somewhere else and turns it into the power needed for the robots.
yeah,
I'm with you on that though. That's probably, if you're looking at the plot of this movie, this is the biggest hole of that. In that, yeah, why is he connected to a generator that's connected to mains power?
yeah,
Like, it kind of makes sense if because they're out in the field, like the generator being there makes a lot of sense. But then, yeah, it's also connected to the
the
power
building.
grid.
Like,
So
yeah, like why bother connecting to the generator? Why not just put them directly to the wall socket thing there?
why not
You know?
just? I mean, they're already back at the base. Why not just take them inside? Away
Yeah,
from
yeah,
the storm.
yes,
And why is the last like little shutdown thing outside?
yeah,
And the best part is like, oh, it's more important to do this last little power down thing than it is to disarm their lasers.
yeah, yeah.
We can do that
But
later, anytime.
yeah. So there's also like no surge protection on these multi-million-dollar robots. Like what?
You don't need it
Like
because you
the
got a
whole like
generator that does the right
thing.
amount of power, right? That's the
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, the whole like the Frankenstein method of imparting life via lightning strike. Somehow an energy surge creates sentience out of hardware incapable of it. Like
That's why I have a strong belief that all of these kinds of movies. So I mean, this is like a genre of movies where, something is given life, a non-sentient object is given sentient life, um, and I feel like this is like this genre of movie is like the like epitome of of creationist belief. That it's like, well, God creates life. That's how this works. So he
yeah,
just smashed a lightning bolt into this generator to give this robot sentience. That's the
yeah, and it goes back to the whole Frankenstein trope of like, yeah, it's use lightning to impart life upon the inanimate.
yep.
And play God, and yeah, it's all they're trying to play God thing, and yeah, it kind of is a nod to that. I think, I think like from an artistic standpoint, that I'm fairly certain they were both kind of nodding to both Highlander and Frankenstein with the whole scene. They had to have been.
And my understanding is that this movie before it got to the point where it is became the movie, is that it was supposed to be a little bit more serious. It wasn't quite as like
Yeah, yeah,
kiddie movie, and so yeah, I'm 100. I You can see that, like you mentioned it there, the Frankenstein. I didn't even think about it until I saw your notes about this, but like you can see the influence of like Frankenstein in particular, in that it's very like this is it's a body that some scientists cobbled out of parts, and then it got shocked by lightning, and now it's a
yeah,
sentient being.
yep, yeah. It's exactly that. But yeah.
I think.
But going on to like the plot holes. You mentioned like the Johnny Five's skills, right?
Oh my god, yes. This is I think this is the thing that bothers me the most about this movie. You mentioned the lightning strike being the biggest plot hole. I agree. I agree that that's probably the biggest hole in the plot. But I can kind of hand
The
wave that
premise
because of all
itself.
the the premise. I can kind of hand wave that because of the because we've got like you said, Frankenstein.
Well,
Uh
it is. It is to ask. It's asking you right there. Let's
yeah,
hand wave this, suspend disbelief, and just go with us on this journey now. That this is how he becomes sentient, and just
and
go with it and run with it. So
I feel that is much more acceptable than I have a huge problem. I don't know if it's the autism or what, but internal consistency in movies, in particular movies and books and TV and all that stuff. Internal consistency is one of those things that will really a lack of internal consistency really drives me nuts, because then I don't know what to believe or understand about a movie. And I think this is a situation where like Johnny Five, number five skills in this movie are like in one scene he'll be a bumbling idiot, in the next scene he'll be a freaking Secret Service commando special
idiot
forces
savant.
operator.
Yeah,
And it's like it goes like this. Like I think the biggest example, the easiest example to point at is the fact that like he starts driving one of the trucks, and he's a terrible driver. That whole scene with him and Ali Sheedy getting like driving away, and Ali Sheedy like hanging off the back of the truck and getting inside and all that stuff. Like he is like crashing into things and doing all this stuff. And then they power him down. They get him on a truck. He powers himself back up. We'll get to that later. He powers himself back up, and he takes this other truck, and he is driving it like he's a freaking like professional stunt driver. Like and
yeah.
then like I mean things like he knows like hand signals for telling people that he's gonna turn and stuff like that. Uh
I kind of want to defend that and say like, okay, some of those moments he was in a super panic and was fleeing, especially like the first one, first time driving a vehicle, and is in a state of panic at disassembly. But when you think about it, like all the times he's fleeing, though, he actually is still fleeing.
oh
So
yeah, the whole movie
there's
he's
no point where
fleeing.
he's driving to not flee. Yeah, the whole thing is him fleeing. So it's
Well,
like
and
he should be consistent about like if that was the reason, like, oh, maybe it was because he's panicking. They're like, why isn't he panicking all the time when driving then, and being a jackass every time? Like,
well,
why is
and
it so?
Yeah, and that's
That's no
I
inconsistent.
think the very end of the movie is what really like puts the nail in that coffin. Is at the very end of the movie when he starts driving, what's funny is he's driving kind of okay, but he still is going like over the line and like driving in the other lane in oncoming traffic, uh,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And it's like he's calm. They're not running from anything. They're not uh, they're not they're not in a panic at that point. Which I'm
Exactly.
with you on that. I feel like it could have been you could hand wave it as just a panic response if it wasn't like
If it
if it
was
wasn't
consistent though.
if it was consistent. Yeah, exactly. I think and then there's things like when he's confronted by Ali Sheedy's boyfriend Frank, and he disassembles the car really quick. Like he disassembled the car down to like like
All the pit.
all
Yeah,
parts
he molded the car. Like if you know what
in
knolling is, he
like
molded the car.
minutes. Like it was a couple of minutes that he was outside and they were not with him. Then on top of that, when Frank goes to shoot him, he's got the brake rotor in his hand from his car, and he's using it to deflect bullets. And then
Yeah.
like later in the movie, he's getting shot at by all these guys. And admittedly, this is another situation where you could say, well, he was in a panic and there was a lot more shooting going on. But when the soldiers are all shooting at him, instead of doing anything like deflecting some of the bullets or like dodging the shots or something like that, because clearly he had a response time that allowed him to do stuff like that. Uh, he instead just runs in a straight line and they keep shooting at him. So
Like
like
he knows enough to like to dodge all the attack robots, but not the military guys.
not
Like
the military guys who are like kneeling on the ground like 100 yards away, and they're all like it's like a battery of guns, and they're all shooting at him. And instead of doing the smartest thing he could do there, he panics and runs in a straight line and doesn't.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, this is just an example. Like, I think there's other little examples. Like, it's funny to me when he's making pancakes for Ellie Sheedy. He he dumps the eggs in, which this is an iconic scene that I also remember. I remember this one. I remembered very clearly. This is one of the few scenes from this movie that I had very what is it called, nostalgic memories of this, of him
yeah,
making
cooking
the
the hash
pancakes.
browns on into box still the
Yeah,
frozen box of
or
hash browns,
and then he takes
frying the
the
box itself.
eggs. He's making pancake batter. He takes the eggs and he just dumps whole eggs, shell and all, into the pancake batter. And then he goes to whisk it up and he's spraying, liquid all over the place. But at the same time, he is looking at it and he goes, "Oh, that's too lumpy." So he knows enough about cooking that pancake batter shouldn't be lumpy, but he doesn't know enough about cooking to take the hash browns out of the box or the eggs out of the shell.
Yeah,
This is another situation where like his like skills, which is funny to me too, because he had just read through the entirety of the encyclopedia that she had. He just read the entirety of the dictionary she had. He just gained this knowledge, so there is ample opportunity to kind of explain this away, but then they don't do it consistently. Like they don't leave that there in a consistent state, I guess.
yeah,
Um, I think him physically too is another example of like he's kind of awkward when you see him on screen. He's kind of like awkward and he moves slow, and like obviously the scenes where he's doing more uh things with more that require more physical finesse, like more dexterity. There's a couple of scenes, not a lot. I was gonna say a lot, but there's a couple, at least a couple of scenes. One in which he is flipping a coin, that you can tell that it's stop motion. Like they switch from doing the live puppetry to doing a stop motion thing,
yeah.
which it makes sense. I mean that them doing that makes sense. But the like so what you see of him is this bumbling robot that doesn't like physically he has a hard time with understanding himself, like his physicality. He crushes that grasshopper at one point. He's jumping around and he accidentally crushes the
Yeah.
grasshopper. But also somehow he is agile enough that he can get himself off of the food truck without damaging it. Like he's stuck.
Yeah.
He lands in the middle of the roof of the food truck in between all the signs, and he can somehow get up and over the signs and off of the food truck without damaging the food truck or causing enough ruckus to draw attention to him. So it's like
Yeah,
this is
and
just a
it's not just him too. Like, the other robots, like they all are very shown as very clumsy or clunky one moment, and then the next moment super dexterous, nimble, and precise. Like, yeah,
it's the I feel like the yeah what you see of them I feel like the it starts early, that dissonance starts early when you see them on the battlefield doing their thing in that intro shot, and then they come up on stage and they're all kind of like very slowly filing up on stage and they're all very slowly doing their thing, and then they cut to like, oh, they're making a drink for the director guy, and it's like they're doing all these like very fine motor movements very easily, picking up the alcohol and pouring just a little bit, and then putting the ice in the glass, and then squeezing the lime and all that stuff. So they show them having this like insane dexterity for like these large robots that
yeah,
at the time we wouldn't have expected. I mean, nowadays we might expect that from industrial robots, but and I think that just feeds into this whole like, well, they look like when you're watching them and they're doing things, and some of the sight gags and some of the things that they do with them, like it makes you it requires you to believe that they're clumsy to believe that this is or something that's really happening,
yeah.
and then they're like, oh yeah, but they're not actually clumsy, they also are very accurate and dexterous and have great control of their limbs and all of that.
Yeah. And then one more thing that you were mentioning about Johnny Five himself was like his his um what do you call it? Lack of stealth.
Yeah, like, well, and it's funny because it's that's another one of those things where it's like this could easily be explained if the movie treated it consistently. This could easily be explained as, oh, he's it's like a baby. Babies don't have a sense of self. They don't understand, they don't understand object permanence, and stuff like that. They don't have this understanding, but he clearly demonstrates these understandings before and after some of these situations. And like, so him hiding, he hides himself under a box inside the truck at one point, and it's like, uh, okay, if you take this from the point of view that, oh, he's essentially a baby, he hasn't learned object permanence yet, then yeah, that makes sense and all that. But if you take it
And
from
Alan
the
Sheedy's character even like points it out a couple of times, like, you're making fun of his language, but I think he's speaking pretty good for a 4-day-old. And it's like,
right,
okay, but then how is he an idiot savant and all these other ones with like perfect uh, perfect English. But
right.
I think you mentioned it like somewhere else in his communication. Well, more on that
All
later.
right, we'll do more. We'll get more into his communication later because I think that's a whole separate subject.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
But it's that same thing though, where it's like, yeah, it just what they show on screen and what they talk about or like imply. There's a disconnect there, right? Like throws me off for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even before they were becoming sentient, like number five and his buddies, they all share that varying levels of how they operate, and it's not just number five; it's also the other robots themselves. Obviously, number five, we're focused on him, and he's sentient, and so there's some things that we're stumbling through with the whole like evolving sentience thing going on. But as far as like if taking that out of the equation and just going like the robots themselves, like they're both kind of varying levels of how they operate as well, and they're both depicted as like semi-autonomous, but then also controlled like drones, which okay, that makes sense for a lot of it, but the way that they handle that, like it has this I don't know, false expectation that it's setting that they're capable of full autonomy all the time,
Yeah.
especially because number five becomes sentient. So it's like, okay, well, if he becomes sentient, he must have the hardware capable of operating, autonomously. So the other ones should have that theoretically as well. And they kind of sometimes demonstrate that, but then are kind of dumb and clunky about it. And then other times they are just controlled like drones, like how you'd expect is from that tech at the time.
See, I don't
And
know
I
if you
think
know this,
even
but the key
nowadays,
is.
like,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, good, no, 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 no.
I was gonna say I don't know if you know this, but the key is if you talk like a robot from the '80s, then you're dumb and clunky. But if you talk like a child who has a fairly firm grasp of most of the English language, but pretends like some of the words don't exist, then then you feel like you're intelligent and
Yeah.
capable of doing anything. That's the key.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, going back into the whole like the hardware and stuff, that the time in that scale of form factor, it's incapable of producing autonomous robots. Let alone ones capable of becoming accidentally sentient. I like to think about this like just because you soak a potato in oil and shock the fuck out of it with a lightning strike, it isn't going to turn it into a rudimentary brain. Like they don't have the hardware capability of being not even just autonomous, but
But
sentient.
I like what you said there, though. I feel like the key here is 40 years removed from this movie, essentially at this point, is that we now have robots that are capable of accidentally becoming sentient.
Yeah,
So
but it's taken that amount of time to get to this point.
right. This movie was 40 years in the future. This was a look into what the early 20s of the 2000s would bring us. So I think all of that, like, okay, so all this kind of like we talk about all this stuff where his skills don't line up, the other robot skills don't line up, like what they show you and what they tell you, and what like they give you little individual scenes of them doing things that are like superhuman, and then we watch them like bumble around as they try to navigate stairs and stuff like that. I think all that's well and good. I actually, a lot of that stuff I could just ignore and be happy with. The one thing that I have a hard time with, and because it's huge it's like very central to the plot, is Johnny Five, number five's communication skills. For some reason, like it's really weird. Where he only has a couple of words to begin with. Specifically, he says, I believe he says, input and malfunction before he learns anything. So he has those two words at the very least, and he doesn't communicate
and he
very
can
much.
read like the whole.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So he read the sign off of that thing. So he could clearly read, and he could clearly process what he's seeing. But then he like he goes through and reads her entire set of encyclopedias and a full dictionary, and after that, though he uses more words, he still talks like an infant. He speaks in a way that is halting and uses very few words and doesn't use a lot of grammar to convey his point. And it weirds me out that like he can make these like full sentences and he can essentially repeat these ads he's seen on TV and these make these quotes from movies and stuff like that. But he can't quote the encyclopedia in full sentences. He's got to say things.
To be fair, I can relate completely.
Can you? Is that also a human dirty invincible trait, or should I say robot dirty invincible trait?
I think that's most of us trait. Like how much of our brain is full of garbage ads that we saw when we were kids because we were forced to watch because we had no choice. We had it was either that or change the channel, right?
And I don't want to be totally clear. I agree with you 100% on that, and I don't think that that's the problem here. I think the problem here.
No, it's not. It's not. No.
That he read he read this series of books, this encyclopedia, which was written in English, and I assume written like most encyclopedias are written. I could be completely wrong. This could have been a very weird encyclopedia where it's all very halting and not in full sentences. But he read this whole thing that had full sentences and everything, and he doesn't even
repeat Sanskrit. That's
what he says. That's what Ali Sheedy's character is very very into dead languages from the Middle East. Is that what this is?
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like
not a dead language. That's actually it's used.
Oh, Sanskrit's not dead. Okay, ignore me then. Ignore me.
You're thinking of cuneiform, sir.
I am thinking of cuneiform. I also, for some reason, was thinking of Aramaic. um, so I think it's funny to me though that like I mean, beyond though the way he talks, it's also the way he understands. So like he read this entire encyclopedia, he read the entire dictionary, and he doesn't understand what death is. But when uh when Stephanie Ali Sheedy says to him, and this is I am not, this is not a paraphrase, this is literally the quote. I'm quoting Ali Sheedy in this movie. I know you don't understand, but when you're dead, you're dead. Death is forever.
Yeah.
And that immediately makes him understand death. Nothing he read in an encyclopedia, nothing he read in the dictionary made him understand death. But that line makes him understand death. And that just like it drives home the point though is he supposedly read all this stuff, he supposedly gains all this knowledge from this stuff, but the knowledge he gains is very selective, and the way he uses it is also very selective. And while again, I think you can hand wave some of his quirks, I think the communication one is the hardest one for me to get past. Is him throughout the entire movie, all the way up until the end, even he is like communicating in this broken, childlike way of talking, which I get that that's a way to like they're trying to make it seem exactly like what you said, where Ali Sheedy sits there and says, "Oh, he talks pretty good for a 4-day-old." They're trying to point out that hey, he is like essentially a child, even though he's sentient. He's still learning things, but the rate at which he can learn things apparently is really fast, unless it has to do with how he communicates. Because his communication is like stuck, in the same mode it was in. He just learned more words, but he uses them the same way he did before. All that. Like getting away a little bit from Johnny Five here though, because like I really feel like they did a good job for the most part with for a 1980s movie dealing with robot sentience targeted primarily at what I can assume is kids.
Kids, yeah, it's definitely a kids movie.
I feel like they did a pretty good job. I feel like this is another situation where I think Flight of the Navigator did the same thing, where it was like there were a lot of things they got wrong and there were some stupid moments, but they did enough right that it holds together for the most part. Even with the holes, it still holds together for the most part. But then you run into the some of the human factors in this one, and I think this is where I take I think outside of the actual premise of the movie, this is where I take the most umbrage with these plot holes in this movie. Is I for one, I struggle to understand, and I get this, and I'm not trying to make light of abusive relationships, but I struggle to understand how Stephanie and Frank were a couple at any point in time. Frank is like comically evil. Like,
I mean, at least she woke up and left the guy. But
yes, 100%. And that's I don't like but I struggle to see, like, usually you can see like, okay, well, okay, so this guy, he was terrible, he was an abusive asshole, but he was also very charming. And so that kind of covered it up for a bit. And so you go, oh, okay, that it's understandable getting into a relationship with someone like that. Frank has no redeeming
qualities.
Not this guy. No.
Nope.
It's and he like the way he is and the way he acts, she is not surprised by any of it. And the very first time we meet him, he is trying to take
Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. Like, it's from the very moment you hate the guy, and there's nothing redeeming about him.
Even
Gaston
beyond
actually
Gaston,
is a little bit more redeemable than this guy, actually.
Well, because Gaston's, I was gonna say Gaston actually he looks good, and I feel like he's got a relative, like, as misguided as Gaston was, he meant well, right? Like, and we can argue about that later. But like, I feel like this guy in this example, like, we are shown absolutely no good qualities from Frank.
Nothing redeeming at all. Yeah.
Which I think is part of that is to show us how bad he is and that we shouldn't like him, and then that way his limited screen time makes it more obvious. But he the first time we meet him, he is trying to steal her disabled dog to sell to a scientific research company. By
Yeah.
itself, that's a tough cookie there. Like that's a hard nut to swallow. That is not the I have a hard time like just working from that point back, figuring out how anyone would want to date this guy. And the like beyond that, even he's like consistently violent with Stephanie in a way that like she seems to act like this is the norm with him, like this is the way he is. So which again, I'm not trying to I'm not trying to take any abusive relationships are a very serious thing. I'm not trying to make light of that in any way. This is a situation where, like, at least in the real world, people, it may not even have redeeming qualities, but they may have qualities that they present to the public that seem okay. And so, but
they try to hide it. He doesn't.
Yeah, they try to hide it. Yeah, he does not hide it at all. He's like 100% like all in. He very quickly gives up the ghost on on his scheme to sell the dog. And then he tries to come and get Johnny Five, and it's like it's crazy. And on top of that, you have Stephanie explaining that she's given him a lot of money, so like she bought his car for him, and stuff like that. And then he still talks like she owes him money, which that's the thing that I feel like that was a touch of realism as far as abusive relationships go, where like the abuser is totally disconnected from reality and also trying to convince the abusee that they are that reality isn't the truth, that there's a whole different set of circumstances. Yeah, gaslighting, thank you. But yeah, so he is so bad though that she like calls him mutant to his face, which also, this is another thing I don't quite get, but he hates being called mutant. Like they never explain that. But it makes him very angry to be called mutant. It's like
such a childish 80s insult to call someone,
right? Like, you were totally not radical, Frank. What do you mean? But yeah, just like I just feel like everything we see of Frank in this movie, everything that we see. So like, they try even on the even on the issues with number 5 and like things like his agility or the way he communicates, like they at least try to show some stuff to try to explain away some of the details. They make comments that explain away some of those details. But Frank, there is literally zero explanation. Literally, he is a cartoonish villain from start to finish. And they make it seem like he was a cartoonish villain during his relationship with Stephanie, which just totally so that makes me go like, how did this happen? Like I'm gonna be awake for days this week thinking about how this could have possibly happened, right? And I think, oh, good.
No, I was just watch the Short Circuit 2 and wash all that out of your brain,
right? And then we could do away with also Newton Crosby, who is another problem I have with this movie.
Let's hear about that one.
Apparently I didn't know this. This was like reading what do you call it? Reading rumors and Wikipedia and whatnot on this movie. Apparently oh God, what's his name? I had his name in my head and I totally forgot what it was.
Steve Guttenberg or
Steve Guttenberg, thank you. Apparently Steve Guttenberg was shoehorned into this movie by the studio, and that makes total sense to me because he does not in any way represent his character.
Yeah.
Like they talk a lot about how he is he's like he shuts himself off from people, and he's a nerd, and he's always like playing with his toys in his room, not like never seeing the light of the sun kind of thing, and that he's totally unsociable, and that he can't possibly talk to people at a party because it would just be crazy. And it's like, then you turn around and it's Steve Guttenberg, which I'm not trying to I'm not trying to fillet Steve Gutenberg here, but the dude is a likable dude. Like you watched him any movie in the '80s with Steve Gutenberg, he's like he's the lovable goofball, right? Like
Yeah.
that's his shtick, right? And yet here it's like, oh no, he is this guy who you can't even trust him around like normies because he's just going to talk about science stuff because that's what he's all about is science stuff. And he wants to be completely alone except for all the robots he's building to be friends of his.
Yeah.
um but like yeah, so like I just feel like and I feel like it's Steve Gutenberg's like as an actor, he's one of those actors where his personality or the personality he presents in movies is almost always the same. And so he sits there and talks about being like this nerdy dude while also being very charming and very quick of wit
Yep.
and being able to talk to people without any real problems other than the fact that he doesn't like it. And it's like I feel like they wrote this character well before they had Steve Gutenberg in mind, and apparently they did. And then you turn around and he is, instead of kind of make the character fit him and what he's doing with it, they just insist that this character is the way it is, and we have to trust that, even though, and there's scenes where he's like he's totally shocked by how normal he can be, right? Like he talks to the bar scene with him and Ali Sheedy.
Yeah.
They're having a conversation and it's practically a date, and he's like holding his own there with her, and it's not like he's not a fumbling bumbling nerd who has no social skills,
Yeah.
but they're presenting him that way, and that's
But they do, like he has like these comments with Ben, his buddy, and they have all these like juvenile talks that you would expect from kids in their teenage years, talking about how they're gonna make moves on this girl, and then like but at the same time like they're doing it in that like awkward way that like, oh yeah, they're gonna screw it up, they're gonna be buffoons about it and bumble into it, but then yeah, he goes on this date and is totally like risen her, like
I feel like and I think that's a good point to bring up, because I feel like Ben is a situation, and this is where Fisher Stevens is an actor, a really kind of I think Fisher Stevens actually is a particularly good actor in that he plays the role. He does not make the role himself. Whereas like Steve Gutenberg is very much one of those actors where I feel like you get that with like a lot of people, like I think Mark Wahlberg, I think
oh 100%. They're typecast around them being them, like,
yeah,
oh
exactly. It's like I wrote this role for this person, and that's why they fit so well. And whereas like in this case, because it wasn't written for Steve Gutenberg, but Steve Gutenberg's bringing that himself into it, it just, there's a total disconnect between the actual dialogue and the way he acts, and the way he is, And so I feel like that's one of those weird things where it's like, part of me believes that could just be some of that nerd jealousy that Steve Gutenberg just had it so easy talking to the ladies growing up. But the other part of me is like, no, it's just he was the actor the studio wanted for the role, regardless of who it was written for or how it was written.
Yeah, casting shenanigans, yeah.
Right.
And you mentioned, Fisher Stevens and his stuff. Like, for the long time, I did not realize that was Fisher Stevens. Like, for a long time, not until I was an adult, at least. Like,
oh yeah,
in college,
for sure.
Like that was mind blowing. Like, what? That's the guy from Hackers? Because like in my brain, that was the dude from Short Circuit, and my brain was just like, yeah, that's the dude from Short Circuit, and that's all I knew him from was Short Circuit. I didn't actually know it was Fisher Stevens. Like, it blew my mind. It's like, holy crap, that is him in brownface. What the hell?
Well, especially because, I may be misremembering this because I have not watched Short Circuit 2 again yet, but I like he was had such a huge part in Short Circuit 2.
He was the main, yeah.
He was like the main character.
Like
they had already kind of sidelined. I mean, Steve Gutenberg was off screen essentially for that one.
Yeah, like Ali Sheedy was kind of like the main human companion, I guess, to number 5 in this one, and then Ben ends up being the main human companion in Short Circuit too. So, Yeah, and all the hijinks that they go through in New York. Anyways, I think that's most of those plot holes that we've got.
I think we've
Moving on
discussed the
to
plot
the
holes.
trivia. Yeah.
Let's do trivia. Let's do the trivia section. Let's do it.
So, the song, "Who's
Yeah.
Johnny?" And I thought for the longest time, like they just picked a random song and that's what they went with.
I thought
No,
so
it was
too.
actually made for the movie.
Not just made for the movie, but I'd like to point out this is I don't know if you know El DeBarge. Uh, if you are a connoisseur of '80s music, El DeBarge should be a known name for you. But I
Yeah, the
believe
name, obviously, yeah.
"Rhythm of the Night" is the one that I think most people are going to know from El DeBarge. But this was
Yep.
El DeBarge's first. It was his debut solo single, by the way,
Yeah.
for this movie. I don't think he wrote it. I think this was written by somebody else, but he was the one that sang it. And so yeah, it's kind of funny. It's one of those situations where like the '80s were a weird time where you could write a weird song for a movie that kind of very 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 loosely ties into the movie, and it becomes a hit, a radio hit, right? um I think another good thing to bring up here in trivia section is so the actual design of the robots in this, in particular number 5, Sid Mead is actually credited with the design of these robots, and Sid Mead did a lot of artwork, like a lot of visualization artwork for things like Tron and Blade Runner is another big one that Sid Mead did. The funny thing about that though is that realistically though, Sid Mead didn't do the actual, like the full on, like didn't come up with the full idea for the robots. And I forgive me because I totally forgot to write this guy's name down. But the prop master for the movie, did a couple of designs to kind of show how they could do the puppetry, and Sid Mead took that and turned it into Johnny Five, the robots that we see in the movie.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's
kind of
funny
cool.
because his influence is there obviously, but it's
Yeah.
also it's one of those situations where it's like you bring in a big name writer to kind of like dress up a script, and they just like they change a couple of lines of dialogue, and then you go, oh, it's also written by so and so, so
I do have to say, like the I do like the robots. There's definitely a couple moments where you're like, okay, these are puppets, but I'd always wondered, like, are these remote controlled like RC units with just like a robot body bolted on top of them? Like, how are they like moving around? Because there's definitely like some of the scenes where they're inconsistent, and it has nothing to do with like the plot itself, but more to do with the fact that they're puppets, and that
yep.
sometimes use puppets that have the agility that they can pull off because of the puppeteer, and sometimes they're doing a full shot, and that's where you can see the difference. Is anytime you see a full shot of the robot, like a full body shot, that's when they become more clunky, and you see more of the clunky behavior from them. But anytime there's like a small like close up, either a headshot or the arms or something, or the little like the third arm that has little manipulator tools on it, those all like happen very dexterous, very fast, and so maybe not so much a plot hole, but just an effect of the fact that they had to use different types of puppets for different scenes, and the puppets themselves just behaved inconsistently.
Well, so bringing that up, the puppets. So they did for the close up stuff. A lot of the close up stuff they used like separate arms and stuff like that. So they would
Yeah.
have the body of the robot
Like
there,
the
and then
tablecloth
they
scene,
would
like,
yeah
I actually thought for a second that that was someone that they had someone's actual arms
yeah
pull it, and I had to, like, rewatch that. I'm like, "Oh, no, they used the puppet arms," but the way that they move, like, you could tell someone's
you could
holding
tell
onto those arms and, like, yanking
yeah.
them,
And
yeah.
that's what there's a lot of scenes where you can kind of see like Johnny's head and he's doing stuff, but the rest of his body's kind of out of frame, but you can see his hands like wildly doing stuff. Like those were
Yeah.
clearly like them using like puppet arms. The way they did the robots, in the full body scenes, there is in fact the person, and we'll get to this in a little bit. We'll get to who this is in a little bit here, but the person doing number 5 was also the puppeteer for number 5, and so he was on set doing the puppeteering and the voice at the same time, which was great.
Cool. Yeah.
That was really cool. But so they actually had a rig set up so that he could just move his arms, and the robot would, like different sensors would control different actuators, and the robot would actually mimic his movements because of the way that they'd set the suit up that he wore.
That's really cool.
So like in all the full body shots when he's moving around or he's dancing with Ali Sheedy and all that stuff, like the movements he's making is actually the puppeteer standing off to the side, like doing those movements. And then they also had a couple of scenes. So they had those scenes. They had the scenes where it was just where you can just see the hands kind of from off screen. You don't see them like actually connected to the body. That was another thing that they did for the puppeteering. But then they also did a couple of scenes, and the only one that really stood out to me was the coin flipping one. But there's a couple of them I think in the movie overall where they did stop motion animation to do it. So there's the scene where he's standing there flipping the coin, and you can tell it's stop motion because immediately you see it runs in essentially half frame rate. So it's like super obvious when they switch
robot
over to
battle scenes. I think some of those scenes
Yeah.
too have some of the stop motions. Yeah,
I feel like some of the things where they needed you to see the whole robot, and they needed to have the robot do something that they couldn't do with the puppetry suit. They just switched to doing the stop motion. And so, like I said, there's a few sprinkled throughout. They didn't use it a ton, but there were scenes. There were some obvious scenes too. So yeah, the robots. I feel like this is again, this is another situation. Like I feel like Flight of the Navigator was the same way, where like the technology and the prop work and all that stuff behind it was so like it was advanced. It was really weirdly advanced for what is essentially a children's movie, and they're all precursors to stuff that we have today, right? Like they're all like they had to figure out how to do things that we use to this day in cinema. The way we do puppetry in cinema now, even with advanced control systems and wireless setups, it works exactly that same way, right?
Yeah.
So on to surprise actors, of which there are actually, this movie had a lot of people in it. Like, the leads obviously were big 80s actors, Ali Sheedy and Steve Guttenberg, and both of which were apparently shoehorned in by the studio. But then you have a lot of other like random actors in this that you would recognize from a lot of places. So like, I mean, even the guy that played Howard, Dr. Marner, I think his name was.
Dr. Marner. Yeah.
The head of he's been in a bunch of movies.
He's definitely that guy from like I know that guy from like the 80s.
He was in this movie. I mean, and he's got like credits all the way up until the the mid 2000s or the mid 2010s. So yeah, he was he's one of those faces that you kind of recognize. I of course didn't write his name down, so God forbid I tell you who he was. But I did want to bring up three people I think I wanted to bring up. I'll start with Johnny Five himself, Tim Blaney, who is has a big career as a puppeteer in film. So obviously that's why he was brought in. But you might recognize him actually from beyond Short Circuit movies. He was Frank the Pug in the Men in Black series. He played Frank the Pug in all of the Men in Black series.
Huge surprise to me, yeah.
Right?
Like those two voices so far apart from each other.
Right? I feel like it definitely, like, his voice wasn't recognizable to me, even as Johnny Five. Like, I recognize him as Johnny Five. I don't recognize his voice from anything else. And he has voiced other characters, but I think Frank the Pug is probably his like biggest one that I saw. But he's also worked in, again, countless movies doing puppetry and stand-in work for digital effects and stuff like that. So he definitely someone who has been a part of a movie that you have seen, regardless of whether or not you've seen Short Circuit. Another one that I love to bring up that I will never stop bringing up, G.W. Bailey, man. Sergeant Rizzo from MASH, Captain Maxwell from Mannequin, Lieutenant Harris from Police Academy, which I think that's the one most people probably remember him the most from. And what cracks me up the most is they had done Police Academy before this. So both Steve Guttenberg and G.W. Bailey have worked together before this movie. But G.W. Bailey is essentially playing Lieutenant Harris from Police Academy in this movie, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's that same bumbling militaristic incompetence. I just he never fails to crack me up. He is always over the top with his stuff, and he owned it because he played the same character in so many different iterations of things.
yeah, yeah. Typecast, typecast.
Yeah, I think the last surprise actor I want to bring up is we've already kind of talked about him a little bit, but we have a little extra to talk about him here.
I
We
wanted to
got
save this, yeah, towards the end here. A little
yeah
bit more serious discussion.
Fisher Stevens as Ben Jabituya. I don't remember how it was pronounced.
Yeah, don't know.
Um,
They said it once and it was mangled, and I couldn't replicate it. So.
Fisher Stevens. I have a deep respect for Fisher Stevens acting. Brown face is a bad call. Like, I don't think. I mean, like, I feel like. So I guess Fisher Stevens and Aziz Ansari had to sit down and talked about this, and Aziz explained that he didn't think that Fisher Stevens really played too much into the more negative and hurtful stereotypes of Southeast Asian and Indian people. But obviously, like, he's in brownface. He's doing the accent. He's doing the accent for laughs. I think the worst part, like the least appropriate part of it is it's the accent and the weird lack of command of the English language, even though they had a scene.
It's about on the same level as the robot, like
yeah,
as Johnny Five at times. Like I noticed that, and I was like, oh, really? There's a lot of they put it in there obviously for slapstick humor and the accent gags and stuff, but they also are kind of self-aware of it a little bit, and are kind of at times poke fun at the fact that it is him doing brownface, because they even like there's a whole joke that they set up in there where Steve Guttenberg's character asks, where are you from, and he goes Bakersfield originally, and then he goes, obviously it's being witty, and then Crosby clarifies, like, no, where are your ancestors from? And then he goes, oh, them, Pittsburgh.
No, I believe I believe what he says, and this is I want to point this out because I feel like what weirds me out about this, and this is why I have a hard time with this portrayal in particular. He says he asks him where he's from. He says Bakersfield. He says no originally, and this is a long running, like, this is a
no. I had to actually I rewound that because I thought that's what happened. Ben is the one that says Bakersfield, pause, originally, and then
okay.
Gutenberg asks, no.
Oh, where are your ancestors from? Okay.
Well, I actually had to go back and rewatch that.
It's funny to me because they handled that joke, because that's a trope. Like, that's a, and that is
it is a trope. Yeah.
It's not only a trope. It's also a very it's a racist. It's a thing that a lot of people that experience racism in their life run into a lot. And it's where, like, people just don't, like, we don't understand how to ask people about their heritage as opposed to, where they're where they were physically born and whatnot. And on top of that, like, just a general insensitivity towards, towards people's place of origin and whatnot. But, like, I feel like the movie actually kind of handles that in a way that runs very counter to the way that joke is used a lot in the 80s, because Ben is actually the one delivering the punchlines in that joke. And it feels like, I think I could have swore, I don't remember who it was, which is also bad of me, but so I've watched a comedian make this same joke the same way to make, and it's used now. Like, if you look at this, like, joke now, a lot of the times when we saw it in the movies in the 80s, it was much more a much more serious and intentional question. Now when you see this joke in a movie, this is a quiet way to let you know that the person that's talking or asking this question is racist.
Yep.
And so I
Well,
feel
it
like,
went through a
yeah,
weird like kind of bump there because you mentioned where it was serious before as a serious question, and then here we see it being used as a punchline, a joke, and then it becomes more humorous, and then later on it transforms into like, okay, we're done poking fun at it. It's serious now. Let's treat it with the seriousness is. And when this is brought up, it's a clear indicator like of some like what era someone was born in, and like you said, like if they're got racist connotations behind it or not. So
right?
it's yeah. Anyway, we did want to save this one towards last and not really bring it up during the plot holes because it's not really a plot hole. It's just kind of thing we wanted to bring up, and it is we can say a lot of things about it and continue to say a lot of things, but I think if you want to find more about like how people are actually affected by this, definitely go to the horse's mouth. Go listen to Aziz and Fisher Stevens, like them discuss that.
Yeah, go look up their
Yeah,
conversation because they apparently had a good conversation about this where like Aziz like looked at it as a very serious like thing where it's like, yes, this is an incidence of brown face in movies, but the representation in this was not as not
not as egregious as a lot of
as
others.
agreed. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I kind of disagree. I think it actually is. I mean,
it's definitely. I'm not trying to give it a pass. It definitely it was there to make fun of the accent. Like it was literally
100%. Like
I'm
that's
not
what it's
in
there
any
for.
way. I think the takeaway from that though is that I do not forgive this. I'm not trying to not trying to hand wave this away, but it's like there is the whole like, given the way movies worked at the time, it could have been a lot worse, I think was the attitude of that conversation.
And this was it's a product of its time, 100%. And
there wasn't a lot of East Asian or Indian or I mean even Middle Eastern representation in general in Hollywood
at the
time.
100%. Yeah.
And I feel like now I think Fisher Stevens actually brought this up that nowadays this would be a role that would actually be played by someone who has that background and is not having to wear makeup to make themselves look like they're part of a different culture.
Yeah, like back then, and you mentioned that before. Like there was even, and this is actually kind of a weird backwards thing, because you had someone who's of Middle Eastern descent play a Mexican in some of the early westerns. It's Omar Sharif. He plays a lot of time. He plays a Mexican. A lot
but then what's his name?
Well, fast forward into like the 90s, and you got the 13th Warrior, and you've got Antonio Banderas playing a Middle Eastern, but then Omar Sharif is also in that movie. Like it's kind of funny. Like the roles are reversed. Like a Mexican guy playing a Middle Eastern guy. Yeah.
I was gonna say the guy from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Tuco from Good, Bad, and the Ugly. What was his name? The actor was. I forget his name. God damn it. Eli Wallach. So it was a Jewish guy playing a Mexican, and he did that in a lot of movies, and that was it is. I feel like that's one of those like quirks of older movies, and realistically one of them I'm glad we're getting away from in general, but just that
it's a way of doing brownface without doing brownface, because at this point it's just like, okay, you're not white, okay, well then you can play someone who's colored.
Yeah,
and it's almost as bad.
Wavy. Yeah. Oh no. I think it's just as bad. I don't think. I mean, I don't have I kind of take a softer stance on the actors themselves, because obviously they're not the ones that.
They're not responsible for casting. 100%.
They didn't build the system. They didn't do the casting. But at the same time, they're participating in, this weird appropriation of culture to make either negative jokes or negative not look so bad when you actually think about it from the back end, kind of thing. Like,
yeah. Well, and on that note, I think it was discussed about like the Fisher Stevens bit where his role, like he was cast for this role, and that's not what the role was originally. And then he wasn't doing that role anymore. Yeah, and then he got brought in, and they rewrote the role, so the role got rewritten a number of times. And I feel like a lot of like the jokes that they make about like they ask like where he's from and stuff, because it's never really set out right that he's Indian. They avoid that, and they even like they joke about like obviously like where are you from kind of that whole joke brought up, but it's not just that, like multiple times like what are you again, and it's like they're poking fun at the fact like okay maybe they didn't even know what this character was written at the time.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe there's a little bit going on there, but outside of that, like it's still bad.
Yeah.
Still
It's like you could sit there and point to stuff and go like, well, given the time, this was a much more innocent decision than some other ones are, but at the same time, it doesn't excuse any of it, right?
Anyway, so more trivia stuff. Location, Astoria.
Astoria. So yeah, this is one of the many '80s movies filmed in Astoria, and I say many '80s movies in that I have a list of two. One of the Benji movies was filmed in Astoria, and Goonies obviously is the most famous one. I also say though that there are some honorable '80s movies, movies that are not in and of themselves honorable, but just that they're like it's like an honorable mention. It's
right,
like
honorable mention. Yeah. Honorary. Yeah, I know what you mean by honorary.
Honorary. Thank you. We're gonna make you an honorary '80s movie. So, Free Willy, I think, is an honorary '80s movie. That was a 91 or 92, something like that. And then Kindergarten Cop, which I think was 93, or maybe I'm getting that backwards. I think Kindergarten Cop was 91. Free Willy was 93. But I think that both of those movies are honorary '80s movies in the sense that they both have very '80s themes and structure as far as movies go. But yeah, so all of those four movies were filmed in Astoria. There's a bunch of other movies that have had done random filming in Astoria, but those ones actually have like
significant portions of them.
Yeah, well, and visually
set there, like
yeah,
they're just outright. Yeah, this is Astoria
because Goonies is literally set in Astoria. But you can visually tell that they're in Astoria because of things like the bridge or the way the houses are set up on the hill and all that stuff. So yeah, this is one of those Astoria, Oregon '80s movies. I think another thing kind of surprised me was how much this movie was made for and how much it made at the box office, which it had a budget of $15 million, which
actually, wow.
Right?
Back
like
then.
So I feel like that was kind of a big budget, and I didn't do the math, so I don't know what those numbers look like today. But I feel like 15 million is kind of a big budget for especially an 80s comedy like aimed at children essentially. But it also had a lot. There was like the list of actors in this movie is huge. Like the people that are actually well-known actors, and so they actually got a lot of people to be in this. And so for that money and the fact that they did all this stuff, a lot of the robotics, like I said, they made these suits for the puppeteers to control the robots, and like there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on behind the scenes. And 15 million, even if it's kind of a bigger budget, I feel like it seems low to me, in 2020 terms, 2024 terms, but they made back. So the total box office for this was 40 million, and that's not even touching how much they made in the home video market and television syndication for the movie.
Yeah.
Because this was one of those movies that, like, I don't know about you, but you actually know, you mentioned it at the beginning. It's like that, you sit down and watch the TV movies, or you get the double feature, Short Circuit 2 kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Like I remember this one being on TV all the time. This one and Short Circuit 2. But yeah, so it made a surprising 40 million out of a $15 million budget is pretty good. That's almost, that's just shy of triple the budget. And so it made a surprisingly large amount of money, which I guess makes sense because it's kind of a big part of our. I feel like Short Circuit is one of those movies where you can quote it to what I would consider normal people, not nerds such as ourselves, Dirty.
100%.
You could quote it to normal people, and they would actually say, they would actually get you or would understand where it was coming from, right? So, so yeah, that's trivia. We did the trivia when we got through that part. So I think I think we've poked enough holes today. I think Dirty in short circuit here. So I think join us. I'd like you guys to invite you guys to join us next time. I believe we'll be here next Friday, roughly the same time. I assume.
Same bat
We
channel.
we didn't talk about this in advance, so we're kind of scheduling this live on the podcast here.
Yeah.
Uh,
Next Friday. Yeah.
Next Friday. So next Friday, we'll be here picking apart Short Circuit 2. I, of course, have been your host, Macron.
And I am Dirty Invincible.
And
we're the plot holes.
plot holes. See? Hey, we said plot holes at the same time this time, at least. We're getting there. We're almost on it.
Remember, no disassemble, bozos. Laters.
Bye, guys. And I'm slowly clicking the outro button. There we go.